Okay, so this video is going to be for anybody who wants to install an oil catch can on their Corolla with the 2zr motor. So, first things first, the intake will have to come off. Secondly, the intake manifold has to come off. The intake itself, self-explanatory. Undo the mass airflow sensor, undo your clamp, get it out of here. Intake manifold, though, is just as easy, but you gotta know how to use a socket and a ratchet and shit like that. So you got a bolt here, a nut right there, a bolt right there, a nut right there, a bolt right there, and then you might be able to see it. Yep, you can right here. There's one right there on the underside here. Actually, pretty easy to get to. Don't let its spot, intimidate you at all. Just need a short extension on your ratchet. So, I'm gonna go ahead, get all the nuts and everything undone, and I'm gonna skip all that boring stuff. So I'm gonna pause the video and pick it up after I get all that off. Oh, and don't forget this intake hose right here, and then this one right here, and then also disconnect the throttle body electrical connection. Alright. Okay, there's two things that I forgot to mention that need to come off before you can start moving around the manifold. There is this little mount for the engine cover. Let's pop that off. And this hose right here that leads from the intake manifold to the PCV, sorry, valve that sits behind it. So once all that's loose, I've got everything else off now. When you take the right 4 bolts, 2 bolts, 2 nuts off of the intake manifold, this little bracket comes off. It doesn't really hold anything, it just distributes the pressure of the bolts. So then you also got to get this loom right here, got to get that off. So I'm going to pause for a second. Now that that's off, just lift it back. Now you won't be able to take it completely out unless you get underneath and remove the clips that hold in the loom that leads to the alternator. I don't think it's necessary unless you really don't like working in tight spots. Go ahead and do it, but otherwise, there's the PCV valve right there. That's what we have to get to. And as you can see, I've got some oil in my intake, so there actually is a need for this on my car. I'm not doing it just because I'm bored. So basically what we need to do is run some tubing from the PCV valve to the catch can inside of either one of the inlets there. Then out of the other inlet to the port that we disconnected at the bottom of the intake manifold. That's basically the oil catch can, just picks up any oil that gets blown out of the crankcase and catches it before it gets sucked into the intake. That's the purpose of it. Therefore, you don't burn the oil. The oil catch can will catch it, presuming that you actually get a decent one. I actually bought one of those $20 ones on eBay, and then I opened it up because it is empty, it's not baffled. I opened it up and stuck some stainless steel wool inside of it, so that way there's something for the oil to actually atomize on and catch it all. So, nextly, you gotta think of a spot to mount it. I had some L brackets laying around you can see I got one on here. And I bolted the other one. Right there. See? Right there. It's nice. I had to drill out the slots a little bit to acquire. So I just ran one of my little fender washers through it with a nut on the other side of it. That way it looks at least somewhat decent. This one here I secured using the factory, or not factory, but the screws that the manufacturer sends with it to you. Just with some lock washers on it. Again, I had to drill out the holes on the bracket a little bit. I just used just a step bit like this. Just drill it out big enough to get the screws through. That's all you gotta do. Alright, so the next step is going to be making all the connections. Well, first let's get the rest of that tubing off the PCV valve back there. There we go, just pull that off. That's all you gotta do. Sorry for the shakiness. I'm trying to do most of this one-handed. Now, for these connections, you can't use just any hoses. I tried using some heater hose, but all that shit did was just collapse. The vacuum is so fucking strong on these motors. I wasn't expecting that out of a little 4-cylinder, but it just flattened these things right out. So, what you need to do is get yourself something that's hard. So went to the Home Depot. This is that hard shit they use to run the water lines to like your refrigerator or ice maker and shit like that. So it's a poly tubing, 3/8 inch inside diameter, which is exactly what the 2 ports on the oil catch can are, and then the PCV valve as well. But the port on the intake manifold is certainly a larger size, and I'll explain how to get around that in just a moment. So I'm going to go ahead and hook up some tubing. I mean, if you want, you don't have to use this stuff. If you want to make it nicer, pay the big bucks and get the turbo vacuum lines and shit like that. If you want to get pretty colors, go for it. But you just gotta make sure it's at least for my application, it's 3/8 inch inside diameter. So I'm gonna get it all hosed up and we'll carry on from there. Okay, so really quick, I'm gonna show you. There's the tubing plumbed to the PCV valve. I got a lot of it, so I recommend cutting off plenty. Don't be afraid to have too much. Get always trim it back. You can never add to it. It would suck if you found out you cut it too short and you had to pull the intake manifold back off afterwards. But here's the catch can installed. You want to make sure it's free of any moving parts, all hoses and stuff like that. So I thought I picked a good spot. It's definitely not, bolt on and call it a day type stuff. So you gotta get a little bit creative. Alright, so I'm gonna continue plumbing this. Alright, so I know I said I was gonna plumb the rest of it, but I actually got a little bit ahead of myself there. So the next step, in my opinion, is gonna be putting the intake manifold back on, because the only reason why you need to take it off, is just to get to the PCV valve. So I'm gonna go ahead, bolt this sumbitch back up, and we'll go from there. Okay, so right here is my little DIY guinea rig type thing. Basically, the outside diameter of this tubing, of the hard plastic tubing, is 1/2 inch. The port coming out of the intake manifold is 5/8 inch. What I did was I used some 5/8 inch interior diameter heater hose to basically make a connector to this 1/2 inch outside diameter heater hose. But there still is that 1/8 inch that you have to worry about. And what I did was I took some 3/8 inch inside diameter heater hose, stretched it around this here, just like that, just to make up the difference, so it'll be a nice tight fit. Now you don't have to worry about it blowing off or anything like that because it's all vacuum. Alright, you don't have to worry about, you know, stuff coming off. If anything, it's just gonna get sucked tighter together. So call it Mickey Mouseing, whatever. I know it's gonna work. Until somebody can come up with something better, this is what I'm gonna do. And sorry, to back it up a little bit, I want to mention that when you are tightening all the nuts and bolts for the intake, please use a torque wrench. This plastic, you over torque that, it's going to be bad news. Alright? You're going to have a bad time. Alright? So, it's 168 inch-pounds for the torque. It's 14 foot-pounds. And you have to use an extension in order to get in there. So I think the rule of thumb is for every foot of extension you lose like 1 foot-pound of torque. So I kind of cranked mine up to 180 inch-pounds because I was using 1/4 inch drive torque wrench. So just be sure to do that. You want to make sure before you actually seat the intake on there that the gasket is inside the grooves properly on the backside, so that way it makes a proper seal. Otherwise, you're going to end up with leaks, and you can't blame me because I just warned you. So, alright, so now you can see that I have that all coupled together down there. You can pull on it. Shit don't move. I know it looks janky, but I don't see no one else doing this on their cars. So now we just got to make that connect to that. So now I'm just gonna mess around with it a little bit, see if I want to actually go under or over the intake. If I go over the intake, I might tuck it underneath the engine cover. That way it's kind of concealed. I don't know if I want it to be sort of a eyesore or not, because this is kind of a clear whitish plastic tubing. So over time it is going to become stained with oil. This is DIY budget kind of thing, so I might just do that because I don't want brown fucking lines hanging out all over the place. Alright, so hopefully the next shot you'll see it all back together and running.